the biggest mistake people make is marketing make marketing dashboards, sales make sales dashboards. And it should be probably part of the RevOps team role if you don't have like a BI function in your company. Having someone own that's got a view across departments is important. So after college, I actually spent some time doing music. So
Oh, nice.
so yeah, I had a little bit of a post-college offshoot career there, but after a while, that sort of um, toned down, and I wound up in a sales training program for a company called Micro Focus, based out of the UK, and so I really kind of started my career in sales.
Right.
And I did that for some time, and the sales operations manager from North America at the time approached me and said, "Hey, I think you'd actually like this more and be better at it." And we spoke over a couple of days, and and I was sold on it. So all of a sudden, I found myself in a sales operations career, something I probably didn't know existed a year before that.
Yeah.
And and so while there, I began as kind of a regional sales ops guy. I did commission reports and forecast reports for the area, and it and I think the thing that really first thing that took my career up a level was sort of inventing a new report that we ended up using worldwide at Micro Focus, and that led into some BI work. And so
Awesome.
yeah, it became like all of a sudden a globally available report for everyone that sort of we created. and yeah, so my career at Micro Focus grew for some time, and then I found myself getting a job at a smaller company called Sontiq. It actually went through a rebranding during my time there, but it was a smaller company, a lot more nimble. I basically had to build the sales operations function there from scratch.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really good learning experience of, okay, I took all this sort of big company sales operations workings and dropped that into a smaller company on a small, like, obviously not everything was there, but just kind of building that the good processes, good data collection, good, just good reporting, trying to build that whole entire function. And so by the time I left, that department had grown from just me to few people. And I've recently started at Ariaka Networks, which is still a kind of it's not a big company, but it's kind of in between the two, right? And now I think, at that point I went from sort of sales operations to revenue operations, which has always been kind of the role. But I think the distinction between the two is really helpful, because as a sales ops person, you end up touching so many departments, and to kind of say, okay, this is revenue operations, sort of gives a little bit of credibility and legitimacy to, hey, I can speak to marketing departments or finance departments or whoever it is, and help solve problems. So that's kind of the career in a nutshell, I guess.
Interesting. So I picked up there that you actually began off in a kind of sales role in the UK. You went to sales ops. So why did you stay in ops and not go back? Did you just, I know you kind of fell into it, but did you just enjoy it to the extent you didn't think going back would be great for you? Or
yeah, I've always enjoyed problem solving, and I have found no lack of problems to go at in this career. I think it sort of fits my personality a bit better. And sales, while it was a good job to step into, never felt right for me. And I think right from day one, sort of that operations role and just kind of doing different things every day, it really just it struck me as home, right, as far as a role goes. So
perfect. Okay. And you mentioned then that you went into revenue operations and you said about customer success and marketing, etc. Aligning all these, that brings us perfectly into like the revenue teams framework questions. So like we found that sales and slash RevOps kind of to be very human sports at the top level. So what are some of the fundamental ways of driving communications between rev teams?
I think from a high level, the important thing is to understand what incentives they have, right? So
Okay.
particularly if you've spent a lot of time dealing with, let's say, sales, and now you have to branch out and talk to those other teams, or maybe you've started your career more with customer success, you can become very familiar with the incentives and terminologies of where you kind of came from.
Yeah.
But I think but it's important to remember that not every team, well, the company has basically this high level set of incentives, but when you go into different departments, they have different sort of requirements and different things that they're responsible for controlling, different things that they're responsible for promoting, right? So understanding where they're at is kind of at the base level the most important thing.
Okay. Perfect. That was great. So like, what would you say kind of like the what responsibilities they share, and if not responsibilities, have you considered like common goals, and what do they look like?
Yeah. So I think it might be good to go into an example here. We're
Okay.
kind of in the middle of building a like a next generation account-based marketing approach, built around the FIRE concept, which you know, is the fit, intent, recency, engagement acronym. And and as we started to build this, you know, it became very clear that this was going to stretch across a number of functions, from marketing to, particularly from marketing to BDRs to sort of sales or account execs. And
Okay.
so building that from scratch and saying, hey, you know, we need to align this with marketing. And, you know, so we thought about the incentives each group had, and then thought about how we would construct their role within this. So to give you an example, so the idea, so sort of go into detail a bit more, the idea of, if your FIRE score starts, you know, it kind of, everything starts at the bottom, right? So
Yeah.
if you started a new company today, you'd have nothing. No one would know who you were.
Yeah.
So it's marketing's job to kind of lift accounts into the realm where it becomes important for someone to get in touch with them like a human, where the BDRs come in. And the BDR's job is to, so a lot of times, so marketing is creating intent and starting to trickle in engagement. And then BDRs are there to sort of increase the engagement, such that over time, your FIRE score increases. And therefore, you've now had 3 teams work together, all with that same goal of elevating one score. And so everyone can kind of feel like a part of that, and everyone's doing the thing that they're designed to do, but also it's tracked from beginning to end. And that even kind of continues on as you get to the point of forecasting, which is kind of where I think this will head at some point, is that, you know, that FIRE score can be important in terms of forecasting, because if you've got deals that are about to close and they're not engaging with you at all, like, you know, no one from their company is showing up at your website, no one's downloading content, that's a little riskier than a company that's just bombarding your systems and the various external things that you can keep track of. So that's, if you can find ways to do that, I think you can create really teams that coexist and function well together.
Yeah, that's from what I've kind of seen, that's the hardest part of the job, right? Is getting them all to kind of coexist and align and go in the exact same direction. And have the targets. You know, that's the gold. So on the topic of alignment, what cadence do you have in place to keep touch points between teams structured and regular, would you say?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We try, what you know, for that sort of specific thing, we have put together a bit of a calendar of how often these things should happen, and it gets filled up really quickly. And so the challenge,
Okay.
I mean, it's easy to throw in, we need to do this meeting with finance once every 2 weeks, and then this meeting with, RSDs and finance, and then this one's with RSDs and BDRs. And I think the best way that I've seen it accomplished is if you really alter, you get a big group once a month, and then you really go all small groups after that. I think if anything is in that mid range, I've not seen it work as well, right? So where you kind of keep, like, a BDR and RSD one-on-one should happen like once or twice a week, and like a sales team should be every other week, like as a group or something like that. So there's
Okay.
it's it's a tough question, but I think if you look at the sort of the hierarchy of like who needs to meet, the more you need more meetings one-on-one and less big group. Like, kind of think of it as a pyramid. So
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, meetings are pretty important. So, but
yeah.
another question would be like, to what extent can silo leaders see into each other's funnels? Like, how does that work for you in your case, from marketing, customer success, and sales?
Yeah, so it's important to make readable and consistent dashboards. From that standpoint, I think the biggest mistake people make is having marketing make marketing dashboards, sales make sales dashboards. So it should, I mean, at least in my humble opinion, it should be probably part of the RevOps team role. If you don't have like a BI function in your company, having someone own that's got a view across departments is important, because you just end up with a mash of charts and weird Salesforce graphs everywhere. And so just putting that, and what I like to do is I like to kind of, so you're really going to see like an interface of marketing and sales. So having one dashboard that kind of shows them both and how they impact each other is probably the best way to get that there. So you can actually have one thing up on the screen and everyone's eyes are going to be there, rather than, oh, hey, I'm marketing, the marketing dashboard's up, let me stare at it, while the salespeople are like waiting for the sales dashboard to come up. So that visibility is all about like not just putting it somewhere, but making sure people look at it. And I think that whenever I talk about reporting, I think it's important for the managers to get it. So you really need to get the sort of hearts and minds of the management group too, because if they get it, then their teams will be forced to focus on it. So I think you really need to spend time with the management level to understand and explain the reporting so that they can get it. Like, they should be fascinated by it, which if you do it right, I think they are.
So on that point, how do you do it? How do you do it currently? Have you got one place where you can all view that, or is it like you say, you're waiting for each other's turns, each department's turns to see?
Well, we're getting better. I think I think we've taken, I think wherever I've been, it's always, I feel like everywhere I go, there's like decentralized reporting, which, it's great for everyone to have access to reports and be able to like do self-service data grabs. But at the same time, you need to grab that function as a sales ops or rev op team, and you need to grab it and make it important, say, these are the ones we're going with. And then you really need to build that credibility quickly with leadership and say, listen, if you have that ability to like make good dashboards, it should be pretty easy for you to sell them on what you're selling, or that they should buy what you're selling, because it tends to be pretty low hanging fruit if that's not already a centralized role, to make something that's easier to understand, more focused, and right fit for the right audience, right? So I think if you grab that function, and it can be a really good way to sort of build RevOps credibility, especially if you're at a place where RevOps is rather new or anything like that. So
okay, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting listening to different takes on people have and stuff. Like you mentioned, you use Salesforce, right? And you take the graphs in Salesforce, and like, do you have any tools that you've successfully implemented to help this, or is it all just kind of like saying each department tries to align, but manually?
So I think there's that, in the past, I sort of haven't got around to it in my new role, but in the past, I think, when you have and this is super common, where you have multiple systems, I think some of the, like, it's easy to do sales and marketing reporting from Salesforce, but if you start having to do sort of finance, like if you're starting to mash up finance and sales and maybe even sort of like your actual like production system of like whatever SaaS tool you're selling, right? There's some sort of usually a homegrown system where you're sort of giving away your product and once you get there, I think that's when you need to look at like more of a BI solution, because even if you push data from one system to another and kind of have it there, I think, once you look at two systems, you really need to step outside and find ways to create a data source that is that mix, that sort of combo, right? Where you can compare your finance data to your Salesforce data, right? And make sure that things are going smoothly. Or a lot of that needs to happen sort of outside of a given system, in my opinion. And then any tool like Click or Tableau, I think whatever it is you use, within something like RevOps, it's probably not super critical which tool it is you're using, as long as you can find a way to sort of take two sets of data and compare them across a set of variables, right? So as long as you can find, like an account has to match from one set to the other, and then you can pick a certain number of metrics that, or a certain number of variables that are in both systems, and then you can start looking at things in greater detail and getting a lot of and from a finance point of view, they can make sure that their booking is accurate. From a sales point of view, you'll have a lot better access to historical financial data, right? So it can go both ways, but you need to align on a bunch of terminology first, and then it can go pretty well. And have someone good with SQL or APIs, or someone to really batch it all together. If you can sort of architect it correctly, then I think it can provide a ton of value, for aligning teams that run out of completely different systems, right? So I started off with the sales and marketing, which was kind of the easy one, but once you get out there, you really need to start organizing everything a lot better.
Definitely. And I've kind of, I think I know, but one of the last questions is for this part of the framework is kind of what do you wish you could do better? And I guess from what I understand, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like with any company, right? Is aligning the revenue departments all into one place. It's kind of like it's not an impossible, but it's a difficult task to do, but it's like ever changing, right?
I think the thing I would like to do better is to make sure that all departments are running off the same terminology in general. So I think I think it can be pretty easy for things to sort of change definition from one spot to another. So you can have product kind of say, here's how I think about the world, and sales goes off and sells it, and it's a little different. And then, it shows up in finance, and they're more worried about a different slice of that. You could have 10 products, and it'll get sliced differently when product thinks about it, when sales thinks about it, and then in finance, they're like, we don't really care. We just care how it gets sold, right? Like that. So you need to pick, you need all of those people in a room to agree on like 3 or 4 major hierarchies, and then all the rest of it fits into place.
Yeah.
So it's always hard to show up in the middle of all of this, but you see what I'm saying?
It's interesting, right? Like you need them. We kind of have a saying over in the UK, like singing off the same hymn sheet, right? Like you need them all singing off the same hymn sheet. How do you think you can do that? Like that's the question. Like how do you think you can get all these different departments, finance, sales and marketing, customer success, to sing off the same hymn sheet?
You have to sell the outcome.
Okay.
So you have to say, listen, this might be awkward for you for a second, but the outcome will be matching reports left to right in the business, or however, up to down, however you want to think about it. You really have to sell that outcome, and then the other outcome aside from that is that sort of cross team communication. So you're going to save a lot of time. You have to sort of say, think about all those meetings you spent, like you've been using a term and the other person was thinking of it completely differently, right? So you really can really hone down on better communication and better reporting if you get these sort of terminology things right.
Yeah, for sure. And just going on to kind of the rep framework questions. So like, what's the groundwork required to guarantee the successful adoption of new processes? So like, yeah, what would you say?
I think it has to start early. So when you're building the process, you have to think about that. And it's not just, oh, I need to collect this piece of data. I need to put this gate here. You can't just think about like what you need to do from, a control function or from a reporting function. You have to think about how, like during that process, think about how you're going to do it. And every process has like a different flavor.
Okay.
So you can have you can have kind of a legal process where it's like, okay, we really need you to collect this piece of information so that we can actually book the deal, right? Like a finance legal, this is required. And so that process, it's like, well, we don't really have a choice. We're just going to say you have to do it.
Okay.
Make a validation rule, right?
Yeah.
That's easy. And then the harder processes are the 2 main flavors I've seen are ones that are very obviously helping reps, like at least the design is, or ones that are very obviously trying to sort of monitor the reps in some way. And that can come across a bit more negatively, but I think that's the problem is that if you're going to do, and I'll kind of take one at a time, and I'll start with the monitor one.
Yeah, please do.
If you're gonna have some sort of a, like, is your pipeline big enough? Is it moving fast enough? Are you closing enough deals? And and what I've found works the best is you should never monitor anything that you can't change. So you want to be able to say, okay, if I'm seeing a little bit of like if the performance of a single part, like a single thing that you're monitoring isn't working well, you better know what the answer is. You better know how to say, okay, we see it. We need to help you, right? Whoever it is that's kind of being monitored. If you don't have that groundwork in place before you even start, you're just gonna make people feel bad, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's all about monitor what you can coach. And then I think if you think about it that way, then you can kind of break the entire funnel down from, are you booking enough deals? Like, you can kind of go backwards from that, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually you get to the part where, are you good at closing, but are you bad at moving things from first call to negotiation? Are you struggling to get that first interest, right? Are you struggling with prospecting or business development in some way? And then if reps have an issue, they're usually good at something else. I mean, that's typically how they got here. They've got strengths and weaknesses. And all this is doing is helping a manager as a coach to understand those strengths and weaknesses and hone in on the weakness of a particular individual to help them out most there to get the best results from their coaching. So if you build it in with that in mind, then the managers are going to get what they're doing. They're going to use it. You're just giving them flashlights to go find their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of what you said about there's no point monitoring a problem you can't fix, right? Like it just makes people worry, and there's kind of no need for it. But how do you, you mentioned you talking about the pipeline, right? So like some people are maybe good at getting the intrigue, but they're not great at then closing or whatever, however you like it. How do you, whether it be you or your colleagues, sit down with reps and kind of look through that? Like how do you find out, right, you're good at this, you're bad at that, is kind of what I'm asking in layman's terms.
How we find it is by, setting the right metrics around what we think it means to be good at that thing.
Okay.
And I think if you've designed your pipeline correct, or your sort of your funnel, or your system well enough, where most sales are kind of the same, and there's a million different ways of setting up your stages. But the idea is you should be able to set up the right sensors to see, like, are you creating enough ops? Are they moving? So it's not always like, oh, do you have enough in stage 3 or stage 7 or something? So part of that is, it's the creation. It's kind of moments where things change. So ops are created. That's your prospecting area, depending on how you build it. But and then from there it's the velocity, and then from there it's the closing.
Yeah.
So it's not the same thing over and over. It's not the same measurement over and over again.
Okay.
You really have to right. So prospecting is more of just a pure numbers game, like how many. Whereas velocity, in the middle of the pipeline, you're talking about how fast are you moving, right? So you're talking about a duration or like some percentage of your pipeline moving every week. And then at the closing, you have to sort of bake into the fact that they only have how many are closing, right? So you have different metrics measuring different things, or different sort of flavors of metrics. You really have to ask yourself, is that metric answering the question I'm asking? And if it's not, you got to fix it.
Okay.
So like I said, if you're saying, okay, this person has a lot of ops in stage 3 or 4, they must be good at moving to there. Maybe not. Maybe that's just where they put them, right? So if you're just kind of looking at the funnel size at every point, I think you might be missing that movement data, right? So if you're asking the questions, can people move deals along? You should be talking about velocity, some kind of velocity metric. So like change over time, rather than you shouldn't have a dollar value, right? Like it shouldn't just be like a $1, or and it shouldn't be just measuring the age of pipeline doesn't tell you that much, because you might have some opportunities that just sit there because that's what they're intended to do, right? So you have this one's not going to be live for 6 months, so it's sitting there and I'm keeping it warm. But the rep should have a bunch of other ops that are moving. So you should kind of I think the one fun metric is like, how many ops change stage in a week? Like what percentage of your reps opportunities change in a given week? Like that's a more interesting metric to me than your average pipeline age is 143.7 days, right? So I think it can get easy because you have some of those things right at your fingertips to do that, but it might not answer the question that you set out to answer.
Yeah, and I think like it's important from what I've seen, like correlation doesn't necessarily transfer into causation, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many different metrics, and you can kind of make a case for each. If you put 2 and 2 together and come up with bloody 16, like there's so many different ways of putting them together. And I guess this is where your job comes in, is like making sure that you put 2 and 2 together and it comes up with 4, So and then kind of like one final question would be, what would be one thing that you could share as really important to a successful process change that might not be so obvious?
Something that's not obvious to a process change. This might be obvious, but I think of a lot of process changes in this way. So in any given process change, you should think about there's kind of a division in time, right? You've got some new process and it's going to be put in place, and there's a before and an after.
Yeah.
And keeping those things separate in your head as much as you can is helpful. There's going to be, I mean, the change management itself is all about managing that step over. But if you can say, what we're doing is we're going to turn this on and we're going to help you in your day-to-day going forward. What we're also going to do is we're going to make up for past sins, and think of those as two sub projects under the same project.
Okay.
And maybe the third part is the actual change itself, where you do the training. But thinking of the idea of, I just like the phrase, making up for your past sins, of we've done it this way for a long time, it's not working, but it's also created a lot of artifacts and data that might not match your new process, right?
Yeah.
So instead of thinking about the past world as something you always have to like deal with and carry on, like go back and make up for whatever happened before as well, right? So it's very easy to focus on the future, but make up for what happened and take care of those artifacts that sit around. I've now seen enough orphan fields in Salesforce to last me a lifetime. Like if things that you moved away from no longer exist, get rid of that BANT field that you had before, right? Like, so
yeah,
there's clean up. And I think that's the non-obvious answer to change management.